You stand at the threshold of a chamber where silk curtains do not conceal but invite the gaze. The air is warm with the weight of candles and the musk of sweating bodies pressed too close. You are not a guest at a wedding, but a witness to a contract, where vows will be sealed not by words, but by the spectacle of flesh. Before we step into this chamber together, a moment to reflect. History has always been a shared inheritance, and tonight, thousands of us are rediscovering it side by side. Whether you are watching from the quiet of a midnight study in London, a bustling cafe in Cairo, or a bedroom glowing with the soft blue light of screens in Manila, welcome. This community spans continents, and every like, every comment, every subscription turns this channel into a gathering place where past and present collide. So tell us, where in the world are you watching from? In the year 1502, the people of Ferrara celebrated a wedding unlike any other. The city itself, nestled between the marshes of the Po River and the grandeur of its brick fortresses, stirred with anticipation. On one side of this union stood the Este family, rulers of Ferrara, whose lineage stretched back to medieval knights and crusaders. On the other, the Borgia clan, new money, foreign origins, and a reputation steeped in poison, rumor, and fear. Between them stood Lucrezia Borgia, 22 years old, her golden hair woven into a crown of pearls, her smile a mask practiced so often it had become armor. The feast was extravagant. Roasted peacocks gilded with gold leaf were carried on silver platters. The scent of cinnamon and clove clung to the air, and minstrels filled the halls with music meant to drown out whispers. Yet the whispers thrived. Guests speculated whether the marriage was a trap, a ploy by Pope Alexander VI and his infamous son Cesare to gain influence in northern Italy. The Este envoys, watchful and proud, did not laugh easily. They carried suspicion like swords at their belts. For them, the wedding night was not a private matter. Too many rumors had followed Lucrezia. Her first husband humiliated, cast aside as impotent. Her second, murdered in the shadows of Rome, his blood on the Vatican steps. And so, as the feast wore on, the Este family demanded assurance. Not symbols, not words, not parchment, but proof. The marriage, they decreed, must be consummated under watchful eyes. When the revelry ended, the couple was led not to the sanctity of a bridal chamber, but to a stage of sorts. Curtains were drawn back just enough for clerics, envoys, and family notaries to see. The bed was prepared like an altar, white linen stretched tight, candles flickering so that no doubt could linger in the shadows. The witnesses stood silent, hands clasped, their gazes fixed though decorum forced their faces half aside. What they saw was not tenderness but negotiation, not love but contract. Lucrezia lay at the center of it, a woman stripped of privacy yet not of poise. The chronicles say little of her expression, yet one can imagine the resolve behind her eyes. She had grown in the Vatican, where whispers of betrayal were as common as prayers, where each feast might end in alliance or in poison. She knew what was demanded, and she knew that survival meant performing not only for her husband, but for the entire watching court. The act was witnessed once, and then again, as if repetition erased doubt, and then a third time, sealing forever the union between Ferrara and Rome in the most grotesque ritual of political theater. Each motion became evidence, each breath recorded not by lovers but by clerks who would later write in cold Latin that the marriage was valid, beyond annulment, beyond dispute. The room itself seemed to absorb the spectacle. The candle flames bent with the draughts from hushed movement, the creak of the bedstead punctuated the silence, and outside, Ferrara's streets lay quiet under the winter night, unaware of the grotesque tableau unfolding in its ducal palace. When dawn came, the envoys carried their report. The marriage was consummated, the alliance secured. But the echoes of that night did not fade. They lingered like the scent of incense long after the smoke had gone, carried in whispers across Italy, from Florence to Venice to the very throne rooms of Europe. What had been meant as humiliation had already begun to transform into something else. For Lucrezia, the veil had been torn away not to diminish her, but to reveal her resilience. Before the night ended, she was no longer simply the daughter of a corrupt pope or the pawn of a ruthless brother. She was a duchess, her body the ledger upon which history itself had written a bargain. Yet, as the last witnesses left the chamber, a question remained, hanging heavy in the silence like smoke clinging to stone. Would this grotesque theater bind her forever as a victim, or had she, in some secret way, already begun to master the stage? By the time Lucrezia Borgia crossed the threshold of Ferrara, she was already a veteran of survival. She was 22, but the years had carved deep lessons into her, lessons learned not in classrooms or convents, but in the blood-soaked corridors of papal Rome. To the Este family, she was a bride. To the rest of Italy, she was a scandal carried in flesh and silk, a woman shaped by the ambitions of men who wore both crowns and daggers. Her story did not begin in Ferrara, but in Rome, at the epicenter of the Renaissance's most ruthless game. The Vatican was not merely a spiritual court. It was a fortress of power where cardinals schemed as eagerly as generals, and where poison was often more decisive than prayer. Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, had risen to the papacy by coin, cunning, and intimidation. His reign was marked by the constant question, how does a man of God build a dynasty as enduring as any king's? The answer, for Alexander, was his children. Cesare Borgia, his favored son, carried the sword. Lucrezia carried the veil. Together they were tools, instruments sharpened by their father's will. Cesare commanded armies, but Lucrezia's battlefield was the marriage bed, her alliances designed to secure the papacy's hold on the shifting map of Italy. Her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro ended in humiliation. In a calculated act of political convenience, Alexander sought annulment, declaring Giovanni impotent. The charge was likely false, but it achieved its purpose. Sforza was ruined, and Lucrezia was free to be remarried. Imagine the whispers that rippled through Rome, not only about Giovanni's dishonor, but about the young bride whose chastity was turned into a public spectacle of fraud. Her second marriage brought fleeting warmth, but it ended in horror. Alfonso of Aragon, a man she is said to have loved, was struck down by assassins. Stabbed and strangled, his body lay broken near the steps of the Vatican itself. Many believed Cesare ordered the murder to rid himself of a rival and free his sister for yet another union. Rome's citizens gossiped in the streets, speculating not only about Cesare's hand in the crime, but about Lucrezia's knowledge. Was she merely a pawn in her brother's designs, or was she learning, quietly, how to play the game herself? By 1502, when the match with Ferrara was arranged, Lucrezia carried both scars and whispers. She was a widow, twice discarded, twice humiliated. Yet she walked into Ferrara's halls not as a trembling victim, but as a figure cloaked in paradox. She bore the weight of scandal, but scandal was also her armor. The Este family saw the danger in her lineage, but they also saw the opportunity. Through Lucrezia, the Borgias' influence could be bent toward their survival. Beyond the marriage bed, Italy itself was a viper's nest. City-states like Venice, Florence, and Milan circled each other in fragile truces, each fearful of the French armies pressing across the Alps, each wary of the Spanish fleets that stalked the Mediterranean. Mercenaries condottieri sold their swords to the highest bidder, and loyalty shifted with the seasons. In this chaos, the papacy sought to be both shepherd and predator. Alexander II was ruthless in his pursuit of advantage, and Cesare, who once wore cardinal's robes, now rode at the head of armies, carving territories in Romagna with fire and steel. Within this violent world, women were seldom granted agency. Yet Lucrezia, through suffering, began to find a kind of authority. Her letters, careful and measured, reveal a woman aware of her precarious role. In one, she writes to her brother Cesare with a tone both dutiful and guarded, addressing him as the light of my life, while simultaneously pleading for mercy toward her friends. The words are honey, but behind them lies the sting of survival. The Este family's suspicion was justified. To them, she was not simply a bride, but the embodiment of Rome's most dangerous dynasty. They scrutinized her smiles, her gestures, her silences. Was she the willing accomplice of her father and brother, or their captive? Did her tears for Alfonso of Aragon signal genuine grief, or were they part of the theater Rome had forced her to master? In Ferrara, she entered as both prize and poison. Citizens lined the streets to watch her procession, dazzled by her jewels, her gowns embroidered with gold thread, her poise as if nothing of her past could touch her. But beneath the surface shimmered the knowledge of Rome's cruelty. She had seen her first husband destroyed by false accusation. She had watched her second husband's life extinguished in blood. She had endured nights where her body was no longer her own, but her family's bargaining chip. And yet, she endured. More than endured, she adapted. Her suffering was no longer weakness. It had become rehearsal, a preparation for the role she was about to carve for herself in Ferrara. As the bells of Ferrara rang to welcome the Borgia bride, the city could not know whether they were welcoming a pawn or a queen in waiting, for behind her composure lay a woman forged by humiliation, sharpened by betrayal, and prepared, perhaps more than anyone suspected, to seize the power fate had denied her. The question lingered in the winter air like frost on the river banks. Was Lucrezia Borgia merely the daughter of the viper's nest, or was she already learning how to coil and strike? The night that was meant to shame her became the foundation of her crown. Where others saw disgrace, Lucrezia Borgia learned to see currency. The whispers that followed her from Rome to Ferrara did not fade with time. Instead, she bent them, reshaped them, until they no longer shackled her, but instead sharpened her image. Out of humiliation, she would craft authority. Out of spectacle, she would create sovereignty. Ferrara's court, ancient and suspicious, expected a scandal-ridden pawn. What they received was a duchess who wielded charm and intellect with a precision that rivaled her brother's sword. Within months of her arrival, she transformed the city's salons into theaters of wit and philosophy. Scholars gathered to debate Aristotle beneath frescoed ceilings, poets recited verses by candlelight, and Lucrezia presided as if the stage had always belonged to her. Men who arrived expecting to snicker at the Borgia bride left dazzled by her grace. The court began to whisper in a different tone. Perhaps she was not poison after all, but refinement. She cultivated this performance with care. The gowns she wore shimmered with subtle messages, modesty edged with majesty, silk embroidered with piety and power. She commissioned works of art that spoke of virtue, paintings of Madonnas cradling infants, yet the brushstrokes also hinted at her own likeness, an unspoken reminder of fertility and legitimacy. She funded convents, aligning her name with holiness even as her family's reputation elsewhere rotted in scandal. Ferrara began to see her not as a burden, but as an asset, the very embodiment of cultural prestige, yet the memory of that night never truly left her. It lingered in the corners of Ferrara's halls, recalled in the sideways glances of visiting envoys, retold in hushed tones across Europe. What had been witnessed 3 times became both scar and shield. No one could question her marriage's validity. No rival could whisper annulment. No shadow of impotence could be cast on her husband or barrenness on herself. That grotesque theater, meant to cage her, paradoxically secured her freedom. When her husband, Alfonso d'Este, departed to war, it was Lucrezia who ruled in his stead. She signed decrees, heard petitions, and oversaw the fragile balance of Ferrara's economy. Citizens began to call her La Buona Duchessa, the Good Duchess. It was not a title granted lightly, for Ferrara's people were wary of Rome's touch. Yet under her governance, the city prospered. Grain supplies were secured, Taxes were balanced with care, and justice, though harsh, was dispensed with consistency. In private letters, she revealed flashes of the woman beneath the performance. To her father, she expressed filial devotion in carefully chosen words. To her brother, she wrote with calculated deference, never straying from the script that ensured her safety. But to trusted confidants, her tone shifted melancholy for lost love, fatigue from endless scrutiny, and yet a steady resolve to endure. One letter, preserved in fragments, carries a haunting line. In the theater of life, one must play the part given, lest the curtain fall too soon. Still, questions lingered among chroniclers and contemporaries alike. Did she ever resent the humiliations forced upon her? Did she carry within her a secret fury at being used as a pawn, as evidence, as flesh turned into contract? Or did she, from that very first night in Ferrara, recognize the peculiar power humiliation could yield? Perhaps the truth lay somewhere in between, a mystery she guarded behind her poised smile and carefully measured words. Her transformation was alchemy in the truest sense, not gold drawn from lead, but dignity drawn from disgrace. The spectacle of the wedding bed might have broken another woman, leaving her trapped in perpetual scandal. Instead, Lucrezia transmuted it into legitimacy. Every whisper of her humiliation became a reminder of her unassailable position. Every envoy who gossiped about her past reinforced the permanence of her present. By the time Alexander VI was dead and Cesare's power broken, Lucrezia had already secured her place. While Rome reeled in turmoil, Ferrara looked to its duchess with respect. Her name, once dripping with suspicion, now carried weight as a ruler, patron, and matriarch. She had learned what her father and brother had never mastered, how to turn survival into legacy without leaving only ruin in her wake. And yet, the haunting image of that wedding night could never be erased. It lingered like a ghost in every hall she walked, a refrain beneath every accolade she earned. The very memory that might have destroyed her became her most enduring weapon. History remembers her not only for the scandals forced upon her, but for the sovereignty she carved from them. But one question still remains, echoing across centuries. When Lucrezia Borgia lay beneath the gaze of her witnesses that night, did she see herself as victim, or did she already glimpse the duchess she was destined to become?